house. All right. Our moderator today is Jonathan George, an MBA student here at Notre Dame and a president of the Net Impact Club, which is co-sponsoring this event. I will now turn it over to Jonathan.
Thank you, Ginger. And hello, everybody. Welcome to our Future of Mobility panel. As Ginger noted, I'm an MBA student here and also president of Net Impact. I'm really excited to host three amazing panelists today, each with a unique and distinguished background as it relates to mobility. When we think about carbon emissions, mobility is super important. The transportation sector makes up about a third of all global carbon emissions. So I think it's important to talk about. Today we're going to explore each of these panelists' work as it relates to mobility. We're going to explore what they think 2040, 2050 could look like, and talk a little bit about what it takes to get us there. Before we jump in, I want to give you all a brief background on each of our panelists, if you didn't have time to read their bios. So first we have Michael Nolan. Michael is the president and general manager of South Shore Line, Northern Indiana Commuter Transportation District. He's responsible for daily operations of a 90-mile stretch of commuter and intercity passenger rail services between South Bend International Airport and the Millennium Station in Chicago. He received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Notre Dame in '82 and a Juris Doctor degree from the John Marshall Law School. Next, we have Matt Peak. Matt is Managing Director of Energy Systems Network, where he leads efforts to discover and commercialize advanced transportation technologies by collaborating with industry and strategic partners. Matt received a Bachelor of Arts degree in economics from UCLA, a Master of Environmental Policy from London School of Economics and Political Science, and a Master of Business Administration from UCLA. Chris Tyndall is the Assistant Director of Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative. And through his work there and previously with the U.S. Navy, he has developed extensive knowledge and expertise in advanced generations of biofuels, advanced energy management concepts, renewable and alternative energy options, and a comprehensive understanding of human behavior and how it affects energy awareness and use. He received a Bachelor of Science degree in Mechanical Engineering from the Naval Academy in 1980. So now we'll move to our panelists. We're going to start with Matt. Matt, could you please talk to us a little bit about your background as it relates to mobility and the current projects you're working on today?
Yeah, sure. So, first off, Energy Systems Network, we're a nonprofit based in Indianapolis, and we work very closely with industry to discover and commercialize new energy and transportation technologies. And, first and foremost, we work with our board members like Cummins and Duke Energy, Purdue University, and other collaborators in the state, but we also work more broadly than that. And I bring to ESN a background involved in a variety of different elements of advanced transportation technologies, going back to policy,
All right. Thank you.
Certainly. Thank you again for having me, John. It's always good to be a part of these type of panels. I certainly cherish the time that I was back in Notre Dame, what was it, Ginger? January of 2018, I guess it was, when I was there, and was able to be a part of a panel as well too. So I'm the Assistant Director for Commercial Aviation Alternative Fuels Initiative. That is a public-private partnership. We have a couple of different sponsors. We have a Federal Aviation Administration. We've got the Airports Council International for North America, Aerospace Industries Association, and then we also we are also doing a lot of work with the alternative fuels, mainly for aviation. So sustainable aviation fuels is what I'll talk about a lot. We certainly have a lot of work we have going on with policy. And policy is a big aspect of it, because we have to make sure we have a lot of long-term stable policies throughout the country and throughout the world, quite honestly. Another large part of it is educating the public, because we have to make sure that people understand what a sustainable aviation fuel and renewable fuels are all about. It's not ethanol. Ethanol is just sort of like an additive, whereas these renewable fuels, both renewable diesel and renewable jet fuel, those are drop-in replacements. You don't have to do anything to the engines at all. So it's just all it is really is it's a fuel that comes from a different source, and instead of coming from dead dinosaurs, it comes from waste oils, fats, and greases, or beef tallow, or oil seeds, or even in some cases municipal solid waste. So the technologies are out there, and that's a big part of it. But in order for us to get to and cost competitive types of renewable fuels, we have to do a lot of good research and development, and we have to improve and make more efficient our processes and our feedstocks, across the board. And as John was mentioning too, I was a former Navy. I worked for the Department of Navy in the Pentagon, basically for the Secretary of the Navy, and working on a lot of different programs for alternative fuels. Great Green Fleet was a big project that we had going on back in from 2010 all the way up to 2016 and 17, and that was a very big effort. And that's basically where we had renewable fuels in the Navy, and we were doing a lot of work also on energy conservation measures. Because these fuels are just drop-in replacements, you don't necessarily get efficient or a better miles per gallon per se. So you still have to cut back on your fuel use, and you still have to be conservative in that perspective. But all in all, though, these sustainable fuels are, I feel, a good fuel for the future, as I'm doing, John, and I'm looking forward to the interaction on the panel.
Excellent, thank you. Michael, we'll go to you next.
John, and thanks for having me here. As a Notre Dame grad, I have a lot of history on the South Shoreline. I took the South Shore from my home in the western suburbs of Chicago back and forth to school some 40-some years ago. The railroad's changed a whole lot since then. And I'll tell you, I've been with this railroad almost 6 years now. And 2 weeks before I started, I got a call from Tim Sexton from university. And his first call to me was, Mike, you're a Notre Dame grad. Welcome to the position. We want express service from South Bend to Chicago. Let's go. And I said, Tim, and we're all over that. And yesterday, I got a phone call from the head of the Federal Transit Administration, Jane Williams, announcing that we had received $50.6 million towards one of our major infrastructure projects, which is a project to put a second track between Gary all the way to the Illinois border, and then we jump on Metro where we've got a 4-track system. What it means for South Bend and the Notre Dame and Mishawaka communities is faster, more reliable service, more frequency to market. Ultimately, right now, you all know who ride our train to Chicago. It's on average about 2.5 hours to downtown Chicago. We've got our marquee train, which is the Sunrise Express, out of the airport, leaves at 6 a.m. and we can do it in about 1 hour and 55 minutes. With double track, we're going to get it down to about 1 hour, 45 minutes. And then when we relocate from the east side of the airport to whether it's downtown South Bend or to the west side of the airport, we're going to run that express service down to an hour and a half. We're going to increase that frequency with double track to 6. And then we also want to put in a 2-car shuttle that'll bounce back and forth between perhaps the airport and downtown Michigan City, so that we can get hourly service from South Bend to Michigan City, where you can then transfer to a South Shore Line train that takes you the rest of the way to Chicago. So effectively, we'd have 6 throughput 1-seat rides and maybe another 10 or 11 2-seat rides, giving service to and from the South Bend area of a significant enhancement in frequency, reliability, and reduction in travel time. Mobility is all about, is our middle name. That's what we do. I was interested to hear Matt talking about the first and last mile. That is always a challenge for us. So we love to hear about partnerships in automation and in flexible vehicles, in automated vehicles that can help take people when they get to their destination, but have to go that last leg. That's one of our challenges and opportunities that we see for the future. But we really are invested in transportation. The double track project is due to break ground next summer and finish up in 2023. We have a companion project that's the Westlake Corridor that's going to run from Hammond down to Dyer. So we've got about $1.5 billion worth of projects in the pipeline here for the South Shore Line over the next 5 years. So the railroad that you've been riding today is not the railroad you're going to be riding over the next couple of years. It's going to be vastly changed. We'll be upgrading our fleet. We'll be increasing our throughput and our frequencies and our reliability. And we're going to be continually looking to provide services and opportunities for every one of our riders, whether you're going into Chicago or bringing Chicago folks back to various portions of Northwest Indiana to the Notre Dame area. We certainly know there's a lot of Notre Dame students and professors that ride our trains, and we're looking to strengthen that partnership as we move on in the future. A couple of quick notes for those of you who want to take the train right now. It is safe. We're doing a lot of extra sanitization, so we really are reacting to the COVID-19 market, which we all know is a challenge these days, but you can feel safe to jump on the South Shore. Right now, we got free westbound rides to Chicago. So take it in if you want to run into speech. Back to you. Thanks, John.
Thanks, Michael. That's awesome news for Notre Dame students and region residents. So our next question, we're going to try and jump to, and some of you alluded to it, the value proposition for enhancing mobility. I'm going to go to Chris to kick us off on this one. Chris, can you tell us about the value proposition as you see it?
There we go. Yeah, so thank you very much, John, and Michael and Matt. I'm glad and honored to be on the panel with you. So yeah, for value proposition, what I see, moving forward, I see where we can be in the future when it revolves around alternative fuels. I guess the bigger aspect of that is that we'll have lower carbon emissions with these alternative fuels. I think that's obviously a very, very big part. When we look at the current climate crisis currently going on right now, we have to do a better job. And I'm not saying that big oil is a bad thing. Help sort of balance it all out. With the current pathways that we have that are approved through the American Society of Testing Materials, we have basically blends that you can blend up to 50% sustainable fuels and 50% fossil fuel. And with those sustainable fuels, what's actually happening is you are able to lower your greenhouse gas emission profile up to 80%, 80%, and that's a huge percentage gain, if you want to call it that, in lowering your carbon emissions. A big part of that too is the sustainability approach, and that is for energy security and fuel surety. We have to make sure we know where our fuel is coming from in the future. I'm not saying that we're running out of fossil fuel, running out of oil, but at some point in the future, if you think of our Earth as a big ball, at some point you're going to pump out all the liquid in the middle. Now that may be 100 years from now, or maybe 1,000 years from now. I don't know, but we still have to be prepared for that. But I think the ultimate goal, though, is really to just lower the carbon emissions, across the board. But I will say this, though, too, that even though we are working a lot on alternative fuels, it does need to be an all-in approach. So you still have to have all the other different things we're looking at with lowering carbon, and that is, electric, going electric planes may not be in the foreseeable future, maybe on smaller, puddle jumpers per se, but not necessarily with some that are going, across the country or transatlantic or trans-Pacific. It's going to be a long time before we get to electric aviation. But you have to also remember too, when I talked about educating the public on all of these, aviation and in the airline industry is first and foremost, the public sees it. They get it. They get on it. They travel to other parts, so they see the planes. They certainly are aware of greenhouse gas emissions coming out of the tailpipe. But when you look at it globally, our emissions are only right now about 2 to 4% of the total greenhouse gas emissions being emitted of all the different types of emissions that are out there. Well, when you look at that, though, we are very highly visible, and the general public, they don't necessarily see power plant generation facilities. So, I mean, if you ask the general public, would they know where their power plant was that provided the electricity for them to turn on their lights? Some of them may not know exactly where those are located. So we do need to look at those sustainable alternative sources. And as I mentioned before, the nice thing about them is that these fuels are purely drop-in, and they don't need any engine modifications whatsoever. So once we get up and producing, and right now we have some renewable fuel companies out there producing it, both domestically and overseas, but the demand is very, very high. A lot of the airlines are certainly wanting it, but we just have to do a better job at getting these commercial scale production plants up and running. So we know that the demand is out there. We just have to increase the supply, and then it gets back to how do we incentivize that, and how do we make sure there's proper policies in place? And I'll get into that a little bit more. So, John, that's kind of my nutshell approach to that value proposition.
Excellent. Thanks, Chris. Michael, we'll go to you next. Could you talk to us about how you think about what value your efforts in mobility bring to the regional communities that you serve?
Well, we're an electric railroad, so piggyback on what Chris said is we're not using, at least in the application of our service, certainly in the power generation, but in the application, we're an electric railroad. And so we're all about taking cars off the expressways and lowering those VOCs. And part of the value proposition is an economic one. That's why I got funded here in the state of Indiana. They're putting up 62% of the funding for this project because they believe there's going to be a return in investment from the private sector as we open up opportunities for Hoosiers to go into Chicago, earn higher wage income, and then bring that income back here to Northwest Indiana and invest it in the community. So we've got great quality of life here, and we want to enhance that by opening up the opportunities, unlocking the region to the city of Chicago and everything that it has to offer, and opening up the region to Chicago for what we have to offer. So it's really a quality of, there's a lot of propositions that we push. We certainly think we are a green entity. We reduce emissions. We are 18 times safer as a mode of public transportation than riding in a car. you are 18 times more likely to lose your life a commuter rail train. So we're safer. We're using electric power. We're bringing economic opportunity to individuals as we invest and as we provide more service and better service. We open that up to a broader group of people. We have a lot of people that can't use our service today because it takes too long to get in and out of the loop in Chicago. You open up that opportunity for someone, you improve their quality of life. And so we have quality of place, quality of life, economic return, and environmental benefits that we think are all tied into the value proposition that is the investment in the $1.5 billion investment that the state and the federal government are making right now in the rail system.
Excellent. Thanks a lot. Matt, let's move to you. Could you tell us about how you see this situation?
Sure. You say value proposition. I think value proposition may be an inherently subjective perspective, meaning different things. A perspective of mobility in my work pertaining to mobility. We're focused on facilitating options and diversity. I mean, for 100+ years, a large portion of society has relied on one option, the car, and we've catered our infrastructure and environment around that one option. But possibilities, become more as you increase those options. And so that's where roles of different vehicles, different modes come into play, whether you're talking about transit, whether you're talking about micromobility, whether you're talking about your Uber, Lyft, shared mobility and whatnot. Each of them have different applications for different people in different regions, right? And so if you affordability, you're enabling communities and people to be what they want to be. We feel like this is particularly important at this time, given some of the things that we've been seeing, particularly with COVID. There's been trends across the United States to reclaim streets, lanes of streets, if not outright entire streets for the public sphere. So outdoor dining, outdoor activities, and whatnot. It's exciting to see, and it's made possible because people are staying more at home. There's, in some regions, less traffic on the street, and so we're starting to see preferences emerge given the unexpected realities presented to us by COVID, right? So this is telling. It's also, something that pertains to the environment as well. Like one of the things that came out during the initial COVID lockdown days was the reactions that the public had to clean air. I was in Los Angeles at the time, and I've never seen bluer skies. I mean, they were alpine, pristine skies. And it wasn't just me noticing these things, it was everybody, right? And so these things become apparent when you recognize that, okay, well, maybe we should have additional options than just relying on the automobile. The cool thing is that technologies and public preferences have reached a point where that's truly possible. We started to see this, in broader areas with the emergence of ride-sharing sources like Uber and Lyft. But particularly in recent years, the emergence of micromobility, of microtransit, of a variety of different technologies that leverage your mobile phone that's in everybody's pocket, leverage the decreasing costs of batteries and electric motors and whatnot. So we very much expect these trends to continue. We expect these trends to accelerate, and the value proposition, coming back to your original question, is all about how do we increase choices such that they improve the ability for communities and individuals to choose what their communities and lives look like, and do so in a way that's more affordable and safer.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. Just for the audience's benefit, Matt's organization, Energy Systems Network, released a report, I think was it last year, Matt, where you guys outlined emerging trends in mobility. It was very, very good report. Great. So where we want to go next is to try and paint the picture for 20 years from now, 30 years from now. Where do you see kind of long term in your space, in your field, of what the future holds? So we'll go to Michael, we'll go to you first. What's 20 years from now, what does South Shore Line look like, or regional mobility? Could you talk to us about that?
There's probably 2 or 3 other, I'll call them high-level plans to increase the network opportunity for transit in the 4 counties here in Northwest Indiana, to provide opportunities to develop commuter rail systems farther out in the region, and therefore provide more opportunities for those who live here to access a different mode of transportation. We certainly will be looking at any technology opportunities. By that time, you won't have, these will all be self-automated pieces of equipment. We're not that far away right now. We just installed positive train control on our trains, which is a satellite-based computer system that if the train is not, if the engineer is not following a specific requirement, like a speed zone requirement, the satellite will take over the computer, send a message to the computer, and the computer will shut the train down. We are very short period of time away from automated service, which will drive down costs, increase frequency. We want to continue to look at higher speed trains. So we increase time to market. It's not distance that is the barrier. It's time to market. So we're going to continue to look at those kind of issues so that we maintain or enhance as much flexibility and opportunity for people to ride the system. And then I'm going to jump back to the last and first mile. Those challenges that we've always had with some of the ride sharing service, some of the different mobility options. Those are the kind of the gaps that we need to close. We're great at moving 1,000 people 90 miles, but moving people that last mile or 2 miles or 5 miles, that's the challenge for us. So we need to do a better job networking with those kinds of services that can actually fill the gap and increase opportunities for people to use the system and benefit from transit options.
Excellent, thank you. Matt, we'll come back to you. How do you see the future playing out in your vision for 2040 and beyond?
There's been trends, I think, particularly pertaining to automobiles, but I think to transportation in general. The 3 big ones, and this isn't original, this is widely stated by the industry, is a move to electrified, connected and automated, and shared transportation options. Those trends are going to continue, but within those trends, there's so much nuance. There's so much room for deviation and emergence and whatnot, especially when unexpected things like pandemics come along and prompt new societal behaviors and whatnot. So to give 2 examples, if anybody's following the stock market right now, take a look at what Tesla shares have done over the last 6 months and take a look at how that has affected other electric vehicle startups' funding opportunities, their rush to go public, their abilities to secure funding and whatnot. If you had pointed these things out as recently as 5 years ago, you know, hey, that there'd be a flood of investors going to electric vehicles and, you know, Tesla would be dominating all of the OEMs in terms of market value and whatnot, you would have been laughed off the floor, right? People take electric vehicles seriously now. The public do, the investors do, the world does, policy and governance and whatnot. So will that accelerate? How much will that accelerate? These are open questions, right? I think that the projections that have been about electrification are true, but the timeframes may be adjusted. The same thing goes with shared mobility. You know, we've seen a hunger for the adoption of shared mobility over the last 15 years, and that accelerated with micromobility and scooters and whatnot, microtransit options and whatnot. However, the wrinkle has come about with COVID and social distancing, right? So you're seeing Uber, Lyft, businesses and whatnot being slammed right now. Well, how do these businesses adapt? How do scooter companies adapt? There's creative things that we're starting to see, such as scooter companies equipping their models with hand sanitizer dispensers so that you can clean off your hands and clean off the rails before you hop on your scooter and ride. This is experimentation. Some of these things are going to have legs and stick around for some time. Some of these things won't. This is also going to sort out companies and technologies, right? As COVID emerges, as we see the pathway towards how society gets back to some semblance of normalcy, you know, there's going to be new companies, new shapes and forms and whatnot. So if you were to ask me, you know, what you are 2040, 2050, what does it look like? Confidently, you can state electrified, connected and automated, and shared mobility. Within that, when it arrives, to what degree it arrives, to how rapidly we get there, I'm not even going to wager to predict that. I'm just going to play my role in the process by trying to push those things along as fast as we can. But history is going to play out.
Awesome, and thanks for the info on how the pandemic has kind of changed everything or is affecting our thought process. I appreciate that. Chris, could we go to you next, please?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you, John. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, electric vehicles and electric trains and the electrification, I think, is certainly a way to get there. And like I mentioned before, it is an all-in approach. But as we look at liquid fuels, we're still going to be needing liquid fuels from now until 2040, 2050, until we have more and more Teslas, more and more electric vehicles on the road. But then, like I mentioned, for electric aviation, that's still a long way out, especially when you're talking about some of the larger airliners. So yeah, sustainable fuels. The nice thing is that they are here. There is a lot of good progress in those fuels. And so I do think that we will get to a situation where we will have more and more of the sustainable fuels that will be replacing, and of course, going along with them, but mainly replacing those, those fuels. Right now, and this is pre-COVID, the numbers were that we consume about 90 billion gallons of jet fuel every year, and that's globally. Within the United States, it's about 26 billion gallons. And so we have to look at how can we reduce the global carbon emissions. That's certainly one way of doing it. So yeah, I mean, 2040, 2050, yeah, if I were a king for the day, I would see that, yeah, we can get there. I don't necessarily am predicting that fossil fuel facilities will be going away completely. There may be fewer of them. Again, we don't know when peak oil will actually happen or if it has happened. But the whole thing is with the sustainable fuels, and probably very similar to the electric vehicles, we can get into a conversation about the incentive programs that are out there. We want to make sure that with sustainable fuels, you are in a situation where you don't necessarily need to have those incentives. Yes, it's good to have long-term policies in place, and that's where I think how we're gonna get there is through those long-term policies. Incentives will certainly help out, but I want to see a day where sustainable fuels and alternative fuels and electric vehicles all can do it at a profit without having any government mandates or government incentives, that it's all market driven. and people are doing it because they want to, and that the companies like Tesla's, like the Teslas that are out there, can make a profit without having the incentives. And I know that we had some government incentives originally with electric vehicles, in order to say, hey, you know, if you buy this, you'll have you know, a little bit of a tax break, or you get a break on the actual you know, purchase price of the vehicle. So yeah, we can certainly get into that kind of a discussion as well too. But anyway, that's where I see us. You know, right now, the aviation sector, we have a carbon offsetting and reduction scheme for international aviation that's being implemented right now as we speak by the International Civil Aviation Organization. And so one of the goals is that by 2050, we will have 50% less carbon emissions based on a baseline of 2005. Whatever aviation was back in 2005, and those emissions, we're going to half that by 2050. So I think we're on the right track. We just need to get more and more of those renewable fuel facilities out there and in production, as I mentioned before. So that's sort of that in a nutshell, John.
Awesome. Thanks, Chris. I'm kind of, we'll stick with you for a second, and by no means am I well-versed in the scientifics behind biofuels, but I'm sure we've got some folks in the audience. Could you enlighten us which kind of biofuels are most viable and use now and you see being used in the future?
Sure. Yeah. So when you're looking at renewable fuels, and again, this is I'm not talking about ethanol. Ethanol is a biofuel, I agree, but it is not a drop-in replacement. It's more like an additive. And right now, you know, we're at E10. We're moving up to E15. But with renewable fuels, you know, with renewable jet fuel, we have a 50-50 blend limit right now, 50% blend limit. With renewable diesel, especially when you're talking about diesel trucks, you know, they can actually put in a full 100% renewable fuel, renewable diesel, or biodiesel. Biodiesel is one way of getting there as well too. But to your question though, John, the best pathway is through using waste oils, fats, and greases. You know, French fry grease or beef tallow from the meat, the renderings from a meat packing facility, an abattoir. And with those fuels, or with those oils, we're then able to take it, and we put some hydrogen with it, basically breaking it down into the carbons and hydrogens, and then turning it around and making a synthetic hydrocarbon out of it. So through that particular pathway, that's called hydroprocessed esters and fatty acids, HEFA. That particular pathway is a good one. Then there is a company that's actually in the process of being built out in Nevada, outside of Reno, Nevada, and they're taking municipal solid waste, and they're going to be able to turn that into renewable fuels, both jet fuel and diesel. So I would say though that the right now the predominance is in the HEFA plants that are out there, just because they're a little bit more profitable. And they're profitable mainly because a lot of those are selling into the California market, where we have a low carbon fuel standard, basically LCFS. And then when you combine that with the renewable fuel standard at the federal level, they're able to actually make a little bit more money when they're selling it in California. And that's what I was getting to earlier about being able to take away those incentives, but not taking them away to be mean, taking them away because the renewable fuel industry is able to be profitable without those incentives propping them up. And that's really what we need to do, you know, across the board. But that's kind of where those facilities are, is mainly with the waste oils, fats, and greases. And then there's also purpose-grown oil feedstocks. camelina, carinata, pangamia. Those basically are oil seeds that are grown. You can take those oil seeds, crush them, and from that crude oil, then you can take those just like through the HEFA process and turn it into fuel. So those are sort of the ways of moving the thing forward and where we are right now.
Thank you. So I want to try and do one more go around for our panelists before we do audience questions. Matt, we'll go to you next. We've got, I guess, students on the call and some others that might be interested. You know, what can I do, or what moves the needle in a grander sense as far as moving these things forward? And I know we've kind of alluded to some of that as we've been talking, but if you want to add anything else, could you please address that?
I mean, as consumers, we can all adopt greener technology. We can adopt the technologies that we want to see in the future, right? We want to adopt the technologies that we want society to be oriented around in the future, which means, you know, a variety of cleaner, more sustainable fuels, a variety of cleaner, lower carbon vehicles and modes and transportation sources and public transportation. So consumers have a role in this. They create the market, they drive the, you know, the incentives and on that front. You guys are all very bright people in the audience, and I'm guessing that there's a lot of creativity when it comes to new ideas for modes. And the great thing is that it's never been easier to enter the space. Before, you know, the space of new transportation innovation, I'm talking about from a commercial or entrepreneurial point of view. You know, before Tesla came along, I mean, the success rate for new automotive companies was like 0% over the last 100 years. It was an incredibly tough market to come into, but we've seen dozens of new automotive companies emerge, and on a more, you know, capital efficient scale, there's you know, more consumer oriented technologies that have come along from modes. You know, I've mentioned micromobility, but also apps and whatnot. There's a lot of room for creative people who have entrepreneurial or technological background to contribute with their ideas at various price points, right? You can also join working for a company if you want. Finally, is those in the audience are thinking about their futures, you know, you got to focus on the role of policy as well. Public policy from a legislative or regulative point of view drives the future, right? How it's just to stick with the Tesla example, how is Tesla profitable? Well, look at their balance sheet, look at their line items. One of the big line items is carbon credits that they get because they were ahead of the curve for markets such as California, which had its clean vehicle mandate. Other automakers had to comply with that mandate. The mandate required them to deploy clean vehicles. And if they couldn't, they had to buy so-called credits from those that could, and Tesla could. So they've had, you know, very large line items on their balance sheets for in their income statements for, you know, the last several years that have facilitated their profitability and their market acceptance because they were ahead of the curve and sold credits. And how did those credits come about? Well, there were regulators and policymakers and people with, you know, thoughtful minds that also happen to have economic backgrounds that established that market, right? That's one role of regulation. It's important. It's very important. The other thing is, like, let's look at automated vehicles, right? Regulation is playing a role right now in orienting the framework for how we think about these sorts of technologies. For instance, the Society of Automotive Engineers came up with levels of automation, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The government adopted those levels. This was a, you know, regulatory decision. It set a standard, a framework for us to wrap our minds around. So now we can think, oh, automated vehicles aren't just, you know, sit back and let vehicles drive themselves. There are a range of technologies, including technologies that coexist with us and enhance our ability to drive our cars safely, right? So consider playing a role as a consumer, consider playing a role as an innovator, and consider playing a role as a regulator. And there's probably a lot more ways, but those are the three off the top of my head.
Excellent. Thanks, Matt. We'll try to move swiftly here to leave about 5 minutes before the hour for questions from the audience. Michael, do you have anything to add in terms of this?
I want a lot of Matt's points I agree with. What we do is market driven. The market now, at least pre-COVID, was a desire to meet the millennials' desires not to have automobiles, to have flexibility, to have the ability to travel with various different modes, and to have higher density and get away from urban sprawl. And so that's what we centered a lot of our market plan around. And to get there, it took a lot of advocacy. So we are in a sector. We're not in a private sector mode. In my world, 50% of our revenues come from some kind of tax-supported base. And so the politicians who make the decision need to hear from the constituents. What do they want? And so your leaders, it makes it easy for them if you communicate to them, whoever who's in elected office. Get involved. Let them know what's important to you. You can shape policy. It makes it a whole lot easier for elected officials to make difficult decisions if they know they have the support of people in the community. And good ideas need support. So get in there and make your voices heard.
Great, thank you. And Chris?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, anything to add on?
Sure. Yeah. So when I was talking about sustainable fuels and having sustainable feedstocks, and you need a lot of good R&D. So my appeal to the graduate students and the undergrads that are out there listening, want you to remember that sustainability is not just in the way of feedstocks and making sure we're getting to the right sources with the right procedures and processes, but sustainability is also the resources of people resources. So at some point in the future, I'm going to retire and I'm not going to be doing sustainability anymore, but it's going to take, it's going to take all the other people that are out there that can be doing some right things. It's the Jacobs of the world, the Tims of the world, the Gregs of the world, all those people that are on this call that will be stepping up and being a part of the whole sustainability. And so we talk about circular economy all the time. That's a part of that circle, so that when I step out of the circle, Jacob or Tim can step in and take my spot and keep that sustainability and the sustainable fuels and the whole issues continue that along the way.
Awesome, thank you. I would ask everybody to give you a round of applause, but thank you to our panelists. We will go to questions. Ginger, I'm going to need some assistance because of my technical difficulties today. Could you ask everyone to raise their hands or speak up on the Zoom?
Yep. So we have our first question coming in from Bailey Jordan.
Hi there. So I was really interested in what Mr. Nolan said about using mobility and mobility solutions to help combat the suburban and urban sprawl. I'm an architecture major, so these are a lot of different concepts that really interest me. So I was wondering if there's any patterns that people have been able to perceive in markets or anything in terms of mobility, where you can see different kinds of communities that are either wanting to embrace the greener and more sustainable mobility practices, or if there are any sort of, whether towns of various sizes that are more combating it and wanting to stick to their regular automobile type practices.
Yeah, we got funding from the state of Indiana, not because Indiana is extremely pro-transit. We got funding because there's projected to be about $3 billion worth of private sector development to develop transit-oriented development. communities that are focused around close access and proximity to the rail system. There's all kinds of examples around the country. You can look over to Chicago and places along the metro system like Arlington Heights, Glen Ellen, Elmhurst, Lamont, have all developed hubs around their transit system so that people have close access and proximity to a good transit base, and they don't need to have or tie down to that automobile. So we don't spread out as much. We have more dense population and less urban sprawl, better planning, better use of resources, better for the environment, lots of positives. So yeah, there's all kinds of transit-oriented development opportunities and examples in this region, and that's what we're trying to do with the South Shore, exactly.
Awesome, thank you.
Okay, our next question goes out to Emma Hamilton.
Hi, my name is Emma. I'm a sophomore here at Notre Dame. I'm studying economics and pre-health. My question is, so there are a lot of students I'm surrounded by in my dorms and everything, and they order a lot on Amazon, and they ship things to the dorm and everything. And, you know, Amazon is a very popular service these days, especially for people my age and especially for college students. And I'm just wondering, how much fuel do Amazon deliveries take? Because they're active a lot every day. I feel like it's one of the most popular services now. So how much fuel, and what can we, and if it's a lot, what can we do to reduce it?
Who wants to tackle that one?
Well, it's probably something better for Matt, but I'll just say that you know, Emma, for Amazon to be able to have that service, it may make more sense to do that than all of the different consumers going to Walmart and parking in the parking lot and going in. So you have one truck per se, one Amazon Prime truck that's going around with all the different people's stuff in it, and they do it in a very efficient pattern so that they're dropping it off. You know, they're not just bouncing around all over the town, but they have a good transit. That would be my input into it. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I can build upon that. That's exactly right. Emma, there have been some studies that have looked at this, and it's a mixed bag, but in many ways it's a net positive, and it mainly comes down to the reason that Chris pointed out. There's, you know, one point of delivery instead of all of us going out in our personal vehicles and purchasing our products. And by the way, all of this is location related, right? I mean, in New York City, for instance, where people tend to use public transit or walk, the benefit of using Amazon is less than, let's say, a rural or suburban area. But for a large part, you know, there's efficiencies that are gained. On top of that, when you have a centralized fleet like UPS or USPS that are routing the deliveries, UPS is a particularly good example. You should look into some of the strategies that they've adopted over the last 20 years to make their delivery routes a lot more efficient, such as eliminating left-hand turns is probably the most famous one, right? Where they don't have to wait at intersections and idle fuel, and they've calculated the amount of fuel savings that have come from that. Now, with that, I mean, so there's positives that come from that, but the nuance comes in the volume in which the platform has been adopted. So with everybody and their mother buying from Amazon these days, you have this critical mass that just has a notable environmental footprint. And by the way, it's great for you to notice the fuel. Also, just notice everything that comes with Amazon. So, you know, I buy a little bottle of moisturizer this big, and it's a box that's this big full of packing material. And when I walk around my neighborhood, you know, the night before recycles are picked up, I mean, there's cardboard everywhere. So look into the cardboard problem as well. So is it a net positive? In many communities, it's a net positive. Is there room for improvement? Absolutely. In urban areas where alternative to vehicle options exist, pursue those. and around the edges push companies like Amazon and who they choose as their delivery sources to adopt alternative fuels, greener fuels, more route efficient technologies, and to reduce or reuse their packaging.
Thank
Alright.
you.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you to Jonathan for organizing this panel, and thank you to our panelists for joining us today. I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. It's been a great conversation. So this will end our panel for today. So if those of you that had signed up to talk with the speakers afterward, if you could stay on the line, and I hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.
Mask up, Hoosiers.
Go Irish.
Go Irish.